Officer Marcus Sullivan had been with the Riverside Police Department for 7 years when he walked into a situation that would destroy his career and cost the city $74,000. He was 31 years old, experienced enough to recognize the difference between a permit violation and community service, but apparently convinced that his authority superseded common sense. One Wednesday afternoon in downtown Riverside, he responded to a call about unauthorized activity on public property and confronted a woman setting up folding tables for Thanksgiving dinner. That woman was Dr. Camille Richards, the city's health department director, organizing a meal for 300 homeless residents using a permit signed by the mayor himself. What Sullivan did next, ignoring her identification, dismissing her permit, and arresting her in front of dozens of volunteers, would become proof of how racial profiling destroys careers, costs millions, and exposes departments that ignore complaint patterns until someone with institutional power fights back. A black woman in her mid-50s, Dr. Camille Richards, was arranging folding tables on the pedestrian plaza outside City Hall at 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. Her city-issued identification badge hung visibly around her neck. The permit authorizing the event sat in a clear plastic sleeve on the registration table. No violation, no disturbance, no threat. Just a public health official coordinating the same Thanksgiving community dinner she'd organized for 6 consecutive years. But Officer Sullivan saw her through assumptions so ingrained he couldn't process a black woman with legitimate authority over public space. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. The Riverside Civic Plaza sits directly in front of City Hall on Main Street in downtown Riverside, California. It's a wide pedestrian area with fountains, benches, and designated event space, the kind of plaza cities build specifically for public gatherings. Farmers markets happen here every Saturday. Summer concerts fill it with families. Holiday festivals transform it into winter wonderlands. The city encourages community use. The permit process exists specifically to facilitate events like this. The plaza itself spans nearly half a city block, with decorative pavers forming geometric patterns around a central fountain that's been a downtown landmark since 1987. Mature oak trees provide shade along the perimeter. Metal benches with commemorative plaques line the walkways. The space was designed for exactly this purpose: community gathering, public events, civic engagement. City Hall rises behind it, a 6-story building with classical columns and wide steps leading to glass doors where the city seal is etched into the entry. It was 3:45 p.m. on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. November sunlight slanted across the plaza, warm but not hot, casting long shadows from the oak trees across the pavers. The afternoon was perfect for outdoor setup. 72 degrees, clear skies, a light breeze carrying the scent of roasting turkey from a nearby restaurant preparing for the holiday rush. The city felt quiet in that pre-Thanksgiving lull, when half the population has already left for family visits and the other half is preparing to host. Volunteers had started arriving at 3:00 p.m., church groups in matching t-shirts from Riverside Community Church, nonprofit workers from the Homeless Coalition wearing bright orange vests, college students on Thanksgiving break from UC Riverside, eager to volunteer before heading home. They unloaded folding tables from a City Department of Public Works truck, the same tables used for every city-sponsored outdoor event. The tables had city property tags, the truck had city logos. Everything about the setup screamed official, authorized, legitimate. By 3:15 p.m., volunteers were arranging tables in neat rows, long tables for serving, smaller round tables where people would sit and eat, a registration table near the plaza entrance where volunteers would check people in and distribute meal tickets. Extension cords ran from designated power outlets built into the plaza infrastructure specifically for events like this, snaking toward warming trays that would hold mashed potatoes, green beans, stuffing, and turkey. Once the food arrived from the community kitchen at 4:30 p.m. A sound system was being tested for the brief welcome speech the mayor would deliver at 5:30 p.m. His 6th consecutive year opening the dinner. The energy was purposeful but relaxed. People knew their roles. A woman in her 60s arranged napkins and plastic utensils in serving station buckets. 2 college-age men wrestled with a pop-up canopy over the registration table. A church youth group leader directed teenagers carrying boxes of disposable plates and cups. This was the 6th year the city had hosted this dinner. Everyone knew the routine. The atmosphere felt practiced, organized, community-oriented. The kind of Wednesday afternoon where neighbors come together to feed people who need it. Dr. Camille Richards had been Riverside's health department director for 11 years. 11 years overseeing public health initiatives, disease prevention programs, and community wellness strategies for a city of 32,000 residents. She'd spent 8 years before that as deputy director, building the department's homeless outreach programs from scratch, establishing mobile health clinics that brought medical care directly to encampments and shelters, creating partnerships with county mental health services to address the intersection of homelessness and untreated mental illness, and implementing a needle exchange program that reduced HIV transmission rates among intravenous drug users by 43% in 3 years. Before that, she'd worked 6 years as a field epidemiologist for the CDC, tracking disease outbreaks across the Southwest, implementing containment protocols during a hepatitis A outbreak in San Diego that prevented widespread transmission, coordinating multi-agency responses to foodborne illness clusters, and training local health departments on surveillance systems that could detect emerging threats before they became crises. And 3 years before that, she'd completed her doctoral research on health disparities in underserved urban populations, publishing findings that changed how public health departments across California approached equity in service delivery. She'd published 14 peer-reviewed articles on public health policy. She'd testified before the California State Assembly on homelessness and healthcare access, providing data that influenced $50 million in state funding allocations. She'd received the National Association of County and City Health Officials Public Health Leadership Award in 2019. She'd been appointed to the Governor's Task Force on Homelessness and Public Health. She'd trained health officers from 23 other California cities on implementing evidence-based harm reduction programs. Her staff called her demanding but fair, someone who expected excellence but supported professional development, who held people accountable but advocated fiercely for their resources and recognition. Her colleagues across city government called her the most competent administrator they'd worked with, someone who understood both the science of public health and the politics of getting things funded and implemented. Dr. Richards had earned her undergraduate degree in biology from Howard University, her master's in public health from Johns Hopkins, and her doctorate in epidemiology from UCLA. She'd clerked for the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health during graduate school, learning how bureaucracy could either serve communities or obstruct them. She'd chosen to make it serve. At 54 years old, Camille Richards was exactly where she'd worked to be, leading a department that protected public health for hundreds of thousands of residents, shaping policy that improved lives, and building programs that addressed inequality rather than ignoring it. That Wednesday afternoon, Richards had spent the morning in budget meetings at City Hall, finalizing allocations for next year's homeless health initiatives. She'd left the building at 2:30 p.m., driven home to change into jeans and a Riverside Health Department polo shirt, and returned to the plaza at 3:00 p.m. to begin setup for the community Thanksgiving dinner. She'd organized this event every year since becoming director. It started small, 50 people, a few volunteers, donated food from local restaurants. Now it served 300 homeless and food-insecure residents, featured partnerships with 12 nonprofits, and operated with a $15,000 city budget allocation approved annually by the City Council. The mayor gave opening remarks every year. City council members served food. Local media covered it as a feel-good story. Richards wore jeans, sneakers, and her department polo. Her city ID badge hung on a lanyard around her neck, clearly visible. Camille Richards, Ph.D., Director, Riverside Health Department. The permit sat on the registration table in a clear plastic sleeve. Approved, Riverside Civic Plaza Event Permit, signed by the Mayor's Chief of Staff, valid from 3:00 p.m. to 9:00 p.m., purpose listed as Community Thanksgiving Dinner. She looked like what she was, a department director setting up a city-sponsored event. She'd done nothing unusual, she'd violated nothing. But to someone driving past the plaza that afternoon, Camille Richards's presence looked like a problem, and that person had decided to call the police. Officer Marcus Sullivan was 31 years old. He'd been with the Riverside Police Department for 7 years, hired straight out of the police academy with ambitions of moving into investigations or SWAT. He was aggressive in his policing style, eager to demonstrate authority, and convinced that maintaining order meant questioning anything that seemed out of place. His supervisors described him as proactive, but occasionally overzealous, needing better judgment in determining when intervention was necessary. In 7 years, Sullivan had compiled a record that should have triggered serious supervisory review. 9 complaints. 7 of them involved allegations of racial profiling, excessive use of authority, or unlawful detention of people of color. 2 had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory retraining. The other 7 had been dismissed with findings of insufficient evidence, despite witness statements and body camera footage that raised concerns. Sullivan had a pattern. He treated Black and Latino residents in public spaces as inherently suspicious, particularly when they appeared to be using amenities or areas he associated with white middle-class activity. A Black family using the public pool in a predominantly white neighborhood. Sullivan demanded proof they lived in the area and questioned whether their children had permission to be there, detaining them for 20 minutes while he verified their address, despite them showing a community pool membership card issued by the city's Parks and Recreation Department. A Latino man jogging in Riverside's historic district. Sullivan stopped him, asked for ID, ran a warrant check, and questioned what he was doing in the neighborhood, treating a man in running shorts and earbuds as inherently suspicious simply for exercising in a wealthy area. A Black woman gardening in a community garden plot. Sullivan questioned whether she had authorization, asked to see documentation proving she rented the plot, and demanded she produce a lease agreement, despite the fact that community gardens operate on a first-come basis with no formal lease requirement, and her name was literally painted on a sign marking her plot. An Asian family having a picnic in a city park. Sullivan approached and asked if they had a reservation for that particular picnic table, implying they needed special permission to use public park amenities. A Black teenager washing his car in his own driveway. Sullivan stopped, questioned him about whether the car was his, demanded registration and insurance, and asked if his parents knew he had the car, treating a 17-year-old completing Saturday chores as a potential car thief. A Latino construction worker eating lunch on a public bench. Sullivan questioned him about loitering, asked for identification, and warned him that this isn't the kind of neighborhood where people hang around, despite the bench being installed specifically for public use. A Black man photographing his daughter's soccer game at a public field. Sullivan approached and questioned whether he was authorized to photograph children, treating a father documenting his daughter's game as a potential predator until other parents intervened. Every complaint told the same story. Every incident involved people of color doing ordinary activities in public spaces, swimming, jogging, gardening, picnicking, washing cars, eating lunch, watching soccer games. Every encounter escalated because Sullivan assumed they didn't belong, that their presence required justification, that their explanations were probably lies. The pattern was clear, the documentation was extensive, but Sullivan remained on patrol. His supervisors noted concerns but took no meaningful action. Training was completed, reports were filed, nothing changed. That Wednesday at 3:42 p.m., Sullivan received a call from dispatch. Possible unauthorized activity at the Civic Plaza. Caller reports someone setting up tables without permission, blocking pedestrian access. Sullivan responded immediately. In his mind, this was straightforward. Someone was using city property without authorization, probably homeless people trying to camp. Definitely something he needed to shut down. Sullivan arrived at 3:46 p.m., parking his patrol car on Main Street with a clear view of the plaza. He stepped out and scanned the scene. Folding tables being arranged, extension cords running across the ground, people moving equipment. His eyes landed on the person who appeared to be in charge, a Black woman in jeans and a polo shirt, directing volunteers. In Sullivan's mind, that had to be the problem. She didn't look like someone authorized to use city property. She looked like someone who needed to be removed. He walked directly toward her. Do you think officers should verify permits before detaining event organizers? Drop your answer below. Richards was directing 2 volunteers on table spacing when she noticed the officer approaching. She looked up and saw him walking toward her with purpose, hand near his belt, expression set. Ma'am, you need to stop what you're doing. Richards straightened, confused. Stop what? Setting up for the community dinner? You can't set up here without authorization. This is city property. Richards gestured to the permit on the registration table 5 feet away. We have full authorization. City permit, approved by the mayor's office. You can see it right there. Sullivan glanced at the table but didn't move toward it. I need to see identification and proof you're allowed to be here. Richards pointed to her ID badge, hanging clearly visible around her neck. I'm Dr. Camille Richards, director of the Riverside Health Department. This is a city-sponsored event. We do this every year. Sullivan's expression hardened. Anyone can print a fake badge. I need real ID. Richards felt the situation shifting. This wasn't about permits or authorization. This was about an officer who saw a Black woman coordinating an event and couldn't accept that she had legitimate authority. Officer, that's a real city ID. My name is on the permit. The mayor's office approved this. You can verify it with 1 phone call to City Hall. Sullivan took a step closer. "Ma'am, you're blocking public access. You're creating a disturbance. I'm asking you to clear this area now." Richards kept her voice calm but firm. "We're not blocking anything. This plaza is designated event space. We have a valid permit. If you want to verify it, the number for the mayor's office is on the permit itself. This is where assumptions become accusations." Officer Sullivan had responded to a call about unauthorized activity. When he arrived, he saw a black woman directing volunteers. In his mind, that confirmed the complaint. Every piece of evidence after that, the ID badge, the permit, the calm professionalism, was filtered through his initial assumption. He wasn't looking at a city department director. He was looking at someone trying to avoid consequences. The plaza had gone quiet. Volunteers stopped moving tables. People turned to watch. Someone pulled out a phone. A woman in a Riverside Community Church t-shirt stepped forward. "Officer, she's the health department director. We've been doing this event with her for 6 years. She has all the permits." Sullivan didn't look at her. "Ma'am, step back." A college student still holding a box of plastic cups called out, "The permit's right there on the table. Just look at it." Sullivan's voice rose, carrying across the plaza. "Final warning. Clear this area, or you'll be arrested for obstruction." Richards felt anger rising but kept her composure. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying the authority of someone who'd testified before legislative committees and briefed elected officials. "Officer, I'm not clearing anything. This event is authorized by the City of Riverside. The permit was signed by Mayor Thompson's Chief of Staff. If you arrest me, you will be arresting a city department director for performing her official duties. I strongly suggest you verify my credentials and examine that permit before you do something that will end your career." But Sullivan had made his decision. Bias had calcified into certainty. He reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Richards didn't move. She held his gaze, giving him one final opportunity to reconsider. "You're making a serious mistake. My name is Dr. Camille Richards. I'm the director of the Riverside Health Department. Call Lieutenant Barnes at City Hall Security. Call the mayor's office. Call your own sergeant. Verify my identity before you do something you can't undo." Sullivan grabbed her arm, his grip unnecessarily tight. "I said turn around. Now." The crowd reacted with immediate vocal opposition. The church volunteer shouted, "This is wrong. You're arresting her for nothing." The college student with the phone yelled, "I'm recording this. Everyone's seeing this." An older man in a nonprofit vest called out, "She's telling the truth. Check the damn permit." A young woman, a volunteer coordinator from the Homeless Coalition who'd worked with Richards on multiple initiatives, stepped directly in front of Sullivan, her voice shaking but determined. "Officer, please listen. Dr. Richards coordinates with our organization on public health outreach. She works with the mayor's office. She is exactly who she says she is. Please just make one phone call before you do this." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Move away, or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." The woman didn't move. "Just one phone call. That's all I'm asking. Verify before you arrest." Sullivan stepped around her, turning Richards forcefully. He pulled her arms behind her back and snapped handcuffs on. The metal bit into her wrists. Tight, deliberately tight, the kind of pressure that goes beyond restraint into punishment. Richards kept her voice steady, projecting to the crowd and the cameras now recording. "I am Dr. Camille Richards, director of the Riverside Health Department. I am being arrested for organizing a city-approved community Thanksgiving dinner. This officer has refused to verify my credentials or check the permit that's sitting 5 feet away. Everyone here is witnessing this." Sullivan marched her toward his patrol car, past the tables, past the volunteers, past the permit in its clear plastic sleeve that he'd never bothered to examine. A man in a church volunteer shirt blocked his path. "Officer, please, just look at the permit. Just make one phone call." Sullivan stepped around him. "Move or you'll be arrested too. Should officers be required to verify permits before making arrests at public events? Let me know what you think." Richards was placed in the back of the patrol car at 3:51 p.m. Sullivan climbed into the driver's seat and radioed dispatch. "I have one in custody for obstruction and unauthorized use of city property. Bringing her in now." The dispatch response came back within seconds. "Copy that. What's the location again?" "Civic Plaza, directly in front of City Hall." There was a pause. "Unit 347, are you aware that's a permitted event space?" Sullivan's jaw tightened. "The subject claims to have a permit. I'm bringing her in for verification." He pulled away from the curb. Richard sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind her, watching volunteers stand frozen in the plaza, phones recording everything. The drive to the station took 4 minutes. Richards spent it cataloging everything: times, statements, witnesses. She'd testified in public health hearings. She understood evidence. This case was building itself. They arrived at the Riverside Police Department. Sullivan walked her inside, past the front desk where a sergeant looked up with immediate concern. "Sullivan, what do you have?" "Unauthorized activity at the Civic Plaza. Subject refused to clear the area when ordered." The sergeant stood. "Did she resist?" "She refused a lawful order to disperse." Richards spoke clearly. "Sergeant, I'm Dr. Camille Richards, Director of the Riverside Health Department. I was setting up a city-approved Thanksgiving dinner with a valid permit. Officer Sullivan arrested me without checking my identification, without examining the permit that was displayed on site, and without making any attempt to verify authorization. This entire incident is on video from multiple witnesses." The sergeant's face went pale. "You're the health department director?" Sullivan pulled Richards's ID badge off, the lanyard still around her neck, and handed it to the sergeant. "Claims to be." The sergeant examined the ID, the city seal, the photo, the title. Everything about it screamed legitimate. "Sullivan, this is a real city ID. Could be fake. It's real. I've worked with Dr. Richards. She briefs the chief on public health issues quarterly." Sullivan's expression flickered with uncertainty. The sergeant picked up the phone. "I'm calling City Hall right now." The confirmation came back within 90 seconds. "Dr. Camille Richards, Health Department Director, 11 years of service. She's coordinating the annual community Thanksgiving dinner at the Civic Plaza today. The event has a valid permit signed by the mayor's chief of staff." The sergeant hung up and turned to Sullivan, his voice dropping to something cold and lethal. "You arrested the city's health department director for setting up a city-approved event that's been on the mayor's calendar for 6 months. I responded to a call about unauthorized activity. You verify before you arrest. That's basic procedure. Take those cuffs off her right now." Sullivan unlocked the handcuffs. Richards rubbed her wrists. Deep red marks were visible where the metal had dug into her skin. A captain arrived within minutes. Captain Linda Reeves, a 23-year veteran who'd supervised Sullivan before and reviewed multiple complaints about him. She listened to the sergeant's briefing, her expression darkening with each detail. Then she turned to Richards. "Dr. Richards, on behalf of the Riverside Police Department, I apologize. This is completely unacceptable." Richards nodded but said nothing. She was building her case. Reeves turned to Sullivan. "Badge and radio. You're on administrative leave effective immediately." "Captain, I was responding to a legitimate call. You arrested a city department director at a permitted event without checking the permit, verifying her ID, or making a single phone call. Give me your badge." Sullivan handed them over, his hands shaking. For the first time, he understood what he'd done. Should officers with multiple racial profiling complaints face automatic termination after wrongful arrests? Drop your answer. Within 3 hours, the videos had exploded across social media. Multiple angles from different volunteers, wide shots showing the entire plaza setup, close-ups of Richards showing her ID badge, medium shots capturing Sullivan handcuffing her while the permit sat unexamined 5 feet away. The footage showed everything. Richards identifying herself repeatedly, volunteers explaining the event, Sullivan refusing to verify anything, the arrest happening in front of City Hall at a city-approved event. Riverside Health Director, arrested for feeding the homeless on Thanksgiving City. Official handcuffed at permitted event, after officer refuses to check paperwork. Black Department Director arrested for organizing community dinner. Mayor approved, Dr. Camille Richards, arrested at Thanksgiving event she's organized for 6 years. The outrage was immediate and intense. Local news picked it up first. KCAL 9, ABC 7, Fox 11, all running the story on their 6 p.m. broadcasts. By 8 p.m., it had gone national. CNN showed clips during prime time. MSNBC featured it in a segment on racial profiling. The hashtag #RiversideThanksgiving trended nationally for 14 hours. The mayor issued a statement within 2 hours, calling the arrest completely unacceptable and antithetical to Riverside's values. He announced a full investigation and personally called Richards to apologize. The city council issued a joint statement condemning the arrest and demanding accountability. 3 council members showed up at the plaza that evening to help finish the event setup, making a public point of supporting Richards. Civil rights organizations responded immediately. The ACLU of Southern California called for Sullivan's termination and a federal investigation into the Riverside Police Department's pattern of racial profiling. The NAACP demanded a review of all complaints against Sullivan and policy reforms. The National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers issued a statement noting the irony that even credentialed government officials aren't protected from biased policing. Community organizations that worked with Richards rallied to her defense. The Riverside Homeless Coalition held a press conference the next morning, with the executive director stating, "Dr. Richards has spent 11 years fighting for our most vulnerable residents. She was arrested for doing exactly what this city hired her to do, serve the community." The Interfaith Council of Riverside organized a solidarity vigil. Local physicians and public health professionals signed an open letter supporting Richards and condemning the arrest. But the most powerful response came from the people the dinner was meant to serve. Homeless residents who'd attended previous Thanksgiving dinners organized by Richards showed up at City Hall demanding Sullivan's termination. One woman, a former recipient of services from Richards's mobile health clinic, told reporters, "Dr. Richards saved my life when I had pneumonia and no insurance. She got me treatment. She followed up. She cared. And they arrested her for trying to feed us." Sullivan's life imploded within 48 hours. Administrative leave became unpaid suspension. The investigation documented everything. 9 complaints in 7 years, pattern of racial profiling, failure to follow basic procedure, arrest of a city official at a permitted event. The Riverside Police Department issued a statement distancing itself from Sullivan's actions and announcing policy reviews. But the damage was done. The video showed everything. A black woman with a city ID badge and valid permit being arrested for doing her job. Richards contacted civil rights attorneys within 24 hours. This wasn't just wrongful arrest. This was racial profiling. This was abuse of authority. This was proof that even being a city department director wasn't enough to protect black people from biased policing. The lawsuit named Officer Marcus Sullivan, Captain Linda Reeves for supervisory failure, the officer who took the initial call without asking basic questions, and the Riverside Police Department. The claims were extensive: unlawful arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Secker 1983, racial profiling and discrimination, excessive use of force through unnecessarily tight handcuffs, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to verify obvious credentials despite repeated requests, and failure to train and supervise an officer with 9 documented complaints showing a clear pattern of discriminatory conduct. The complaint included Sullivan's complete record: 9 complaints over 7 years, 7 involving racial bias allegations, 2 sustained with minimal consequences, pattern of treating people of color as suspicious in public spaces. All documented, all ignored until he arrested someone with institutional power. The city's attorneys reviewed the evidence, videos from 8 different witnesses, the permit signed by the mayor's chief of staff, Richards's city ID, Sullivan's body camera showing he never examined either, dispatch logs confirming the event was permitted, testimony from 23 volunteers, and Sullivan's complaint history documenting an undeniable pattern. They reached one conclusion: indefensible. The city settled 14 months later. $74,000 paid to Dr. Camille Richards, $7 million for the civil rights violation, $4,000 in punitive damages against Sullivan personally. Officer Marcus Sullivan was terminated 6 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final and comprehensive. Officer Sullivan arrested a city department director at a permitted public event without attempting to verify her credentials, examining the displayed permit, or making any effort to confirm authorization before detention. Despite 9 prior complaints documenting a pattern of racial profiling and 2 sustained findings requiring corrective action, Officer Sullivan continued to demonstrate discriminatory policing practices that targeted people of color in public spaces. His employment is terminated immediately. Sullivan's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 31 years old. He filed an appeal through his union. The union reviewed the evidence and withdrew the appeal 3 weeks later. The caller who reported the unauthorized activity, a retired accountant named Robert Chen, who lived in a condo overlooking the plaza, faced public backlash when his identity became known. He'd called 911 because he saw black people setting up tables and assumed it was unauthorized. He issued a statement: "I made assumptions based on unconscious bias. I'm deeply sorry." But apologies don't undo trauma. Why do some people see black professionals coordinating public events and immediately assume criminality? Comment your thoughts. The Riverside Police Department faced intensive scrutiny. How had Sullivan, with 9 complaints over 7 years and 2 sustained findings, remained on patrol? Why hadn't supervisors removed him after Complaint 5? Complaint 7? What policies existed to prevent officers from arresting city officials at permitted events? Internal Affairs conducted a review. The findings were damning. 9 complaints over 7 years, 2 sustained with only written reprimands, 7 dismissed despite witness statements and body camera evidence raising serious concerns, supervisors who noted overzealous behavior in evaluations but took no meaningful action, training requirements completed but never assessed for behavioral change, and a system that prioritized protecting officers over community members. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation. Their findings confirmed systemic failures. Reforms were announced. Automatic termination for any officer with 5 or more sustained complaints related to discrimination or bias, mandatory permit verification before any arrest at public events, real-time supervisory review of all arrests involving public officials, independent civilian oversight board with hiring and firing authority, quarterly pattern analysis of all stops and arrests flagging racial disparities, and automatic notification to department heads when city employees are detained. Dr. Camille Richards testified before the City Council. Her testimony was measured and devastating. I'm the director of the Riverside Health Department. I've served this city for 11 years. I've worked with this council, with the mayor, with department heads across city government. I've briefed the police chief on public health emergencies. My name is on city letterhead. She paused. I was setting up a community Thanksgiving dinner, the same dinner I've organized for 6 consecutive years. I had a permit signed by the mayor's chief of staff. I was wearing my city ID badge. I told Officer Sullivan exactly who I was and showed him where the permit was. He arrested me anyway. Another pause. 9 complaints in 7 years. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. A pattern your department documented, reviewed, and allowed to continue until it targeted someone with the institutional power and resources to fight back. Her voice carried weight. $7.4 million is accountability. My termination is consequence. But money doesn't undo the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of volunteers and community members I work with. It doesn't erase the message that even being a city department director isn't enough to protect you from bias when you're black. She looked directly at the council. If this can happen to me, with my title, my credentials, my institutional authority, what happens to the volunteers who were there that day? What happens to the homeless residents we were preparing to serve? What happens to every black person in Riverside who doesn't have a PhD and a city ID badge? The council chambers were silent. Should racial profiling complaints trigger automatic investigations after the 3rd incident? Drop your answer. This wasn't about one officer making one mistake. This was about a department that documented 9 complaints over 7 years and did nothing meaningful to stop a pattern that was clear to everyone except the people responsible for stopping it. Marcus Sullivan's complaint record told a story his supervisors refused to read. 7 of 9 complaints involved allegations of racial bias. 7. Everyone described the same behavior, Sullivan treating people of color as inherently suspicious when they occupied public spaces he associated with white residents. The pattern was documented, the evidence was filed, the reports existed. But the department treated each incident separately, never connecting them, never acknowledging what they collectively proved. Sullivan remained on patrol because the system protecting him was stronger than the accountability measures designed to remove him. Written reprimands and retraining became permission slips to continue. Officer Sullivan's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $7.4 million. That's accountability. Reforms were announced. That's progress. But money and policy changes don't undo the trauma of being arrested for feeding the homeless. They don't restore the dignity of being handcuffed in front of people you serve. They don't erase the message that your credentials, your authority, your humanity don't matter when bias decides you don't belong. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally remove officers after 5 complaints instead of 9? Do they finally recognize that complaint patterns aren't isolated incidents, but documented proof of bias that won't be trained away? Do supervisors finally connect the dots at complaint 3, recognizing that when the same officer generates the same types of complaints involving the same demographics, training isn't the solution, removal is? Do cities finally implement automatic reviews when officers accumulate multiple complaints with racial components, rather than treating each as a separate administrative matter? Do police departments finally acknowledge that some officers bring biases so ingrained that no amount of diversity training or implicit bias workshops will change their fundamental assumptions about who belongs in public spaces? Do we finally create systems where public officials, health directors, city employees, government workers, have protections against being arrested by officers who refuse to verify basic credentials? Do we finally recognize that Black professionals shouldn't need institutional authority, advanced degrees, and city-issued ID badges to be believed when they say they have permission to be somewhere? Because if we don't fix the system that kept Sullivan on patrol for 7 years, despite 9 complaints documenting the same pattern of behavior, if we don't address the culture that taught him to see Black people as inherently out of place regardless of context, if we don't acknowledge that bias this deep doesn't respond to training modules and diversity seminars, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next victim, the next viral video, the next multi-million-dollar settlement, the next community event interrupted by an arrest that should never have happened. The reforms announced after Richards' arrest sound comprehensive. Automatic termination after 5 sustained complaints, mandatory permit verification, civilian oversight. But reforms mean nothing if they're not enforced. Every major police department in America has announced reforms after high-profile incidents. Training was implemented, policies were revised, press releases were issued, and yet the complaints keep coming, the patterns keep repeating, the arrests keep happening. Comment if you believe this should be law. Officers who arrest permit holders without verifying permits face automatic termination and personal liability. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the department directors, the event organizers, the community volunteers who deserve to serve their cities without being criminalized for existing while Black. This isn't just about one officer or one director. It's about all of us and the world we choose to accept.